Hello and welcome. Today we'll be looking at the overhead panel. More specifically, we'll be looking at the pressurization subpanel, and we'll be looking at how to animate a toggle switch, like I've done here. As you can see, this is now working on this subpanel, this toggle switch. So I'll show you guys how I did that in just a minute. I just want to talk for a little bit first. Most of the work in animating an object is going to take place not so much in Blender, especially if the object is already there, but in XML, in VS Code. But yeah, let's get started on this. It's pretty simple. So, let's say someone comes to you and says, I want you to animate this toggle switch on this subpanel, and I've already coded it for you, so it already works. Because I didn't want to code in these videos so much, because I think that could be boring. So I'm just gonna go over what I did. So what I did was, first thing I did was I went into Blender, and this is where your default Blender is gonna look like. You can just click out of this menu. You don't need it, and then delete all these other objects, because these objects are just default objects that just spawn in when you open Blender. And go to File, Import, AC, and then navigate to where you have your FG aircraft saved, and then go into Models, Flight Deck, and here we have the overhead panel, because that's what we're working on right now. So import it, and we can kind of zoom in here, change our view, zoom in some more, and kind of navigate to this subpanel. And so the reason I came here is because before you start coding in XML, XML, like I said in the previous video, is just a list of animations of objects. But if you don't know your object name, like if you don't know what you're animating, then you can't really animate anything. You need to know what you're animating, and in this case, it's going to be this switch here, which is called, if you look on the right hand side of the screen, it's called the forward man toggle switch. So yeah, we can just simply click each button and kind of get the name of each object here. So this is called the onAnimate _on. So anything with onAnimate is obviously going to be onAnimated, as you can see here. And you can just rename that whatever you want. Like, I'd probably rename this forward, latch, forward, maybe forward, outflow, latch, or something like that. And to save, you can just go to File, and like I said before, we wouldn't save it like this. We just export it like we imported it. So export AC, and then navigate back to where you have your FG aircraft. Go to Models, Flight Deck, Overhead Panel, and overwrite that file. And it's saved now. So yeah, I actually renamed this switch here to forward man toggle, because that's what it is. It's the forward. This is a manual toggle switch, so forward manual toggle switch. So that's also what, if you want to follow the SRS, that's probably a smart thing to do for naming conventions as well. That's also what the SRS calls it, the forward manual toggle switch. And so I try to be consistent here with the naming. So yeah, if you go to this switch, it says onAnimate, so it's also unanimated. But yeah, after we set the name of the object you want to animate, we copy and paste that name, go to VS Code, and this is the overhead panel XML. This is where all the switches on the overhead panel are animated. Those that are animated are in this file. Those that are not animated aren't going to be in this file. And so each subpanel, the way this is organized is that each subpanel kind of has its own section here. This is the electrical subpanel here, and you can see the APU generator switch has a little section, left bus switch has a section, and so on and so forth. The hydraulic switches have a little section here. Fuel system has a little section. And so down here, since upon opening FlightGear, you'll see that nothing on this subpanel is animated. So there's not going to be a section for the pressurization subpanel in the XML code because nothing's animated. So as you can see here, I just kind of added its own little section here. This is the pressurization subpanel, and specifically this is the forward manual toggle switch animation. And so let's look at this more carefully. So we have two animations. This is one animation, and then this is another one. That's all you really need in order to animate a toggle switch. I'll go through it line by line here to try to explain what's happening. So this describes that this is indeed an animation, and then pick. What this does is that it makes the entire object clickable. So if we look here, so this is the selectable field. So this kind of makes the entire object selectable, and that's how most switches operate on the overhead panel. So if you look at, let's go to FlightGear and look at this. If you zoom in really close on that object here, you'll see if you look closely at my mouse, as my mouse goes over that toggle switch, it changes immediately to a kind of pointer selectable mouse. That kind of tells me, okay, this is selectable. And when I click on it, it is indeed selectable. So if I move anywhere on the object, so you can see it is selectable. If I move outside the range of the object here, it's no longer selectable. So that's how that works. There's also for this, you don't have to make this pick. You could also do there's a thing called a hotspot, and I think those are more suited for synoptic displays. But yeah, I mean, anyways, I digress. The pick just makes the entire object clickable, and then you have to specify what object is going to be clickable, and this is the forward man toggle switch that I was talking about earlier. You have to specify what object you're animating, and this is where you do it. Just do object name, the object, and then you have to close off that XML code here with the / object name. And then we have the action of actually selecting that selectable field. This button specifies left click. So the 0 button means left click. The 1 button specifies right click, and then forward scroll is button 3. Backward scroll is button 4. And if you want a better example of the scrollings and the different left and right clicks, you can look at if you just scroll and look at the master bright knob. So yeah, this is left click, this is forward scroll, and this is right click, and then this is backward scroll. So yeah, this knob has 2 actions because we can go scroll, we can turn the knob forward, or I guess was it clockwise or counterclockwise. And yeah, there'll be a whole video about the knob and how to animate it and stuff like that. But anyways, I just wanted to show you these different button choices here. So let's go back down. This makes it repeatable. The selectable field repeatable. If you want to hold it, if you, for example, if you set this to true, not turbine, true, this kind of makes it so that way you can click and hold it, and then I think you have to. This makes it so that way you have to click and hold it in order for it to work, I believe. False just means it's just you have to click it once and that's it for it to work. And then we have like a little binding here that kind of says, if we press left click and if we press left click, it's going to property cycle this property from 0 to 1 or from 1 to 0. And so you might ask, okay, how do we make this property? So usually if the object is not coded for and it's inanimate, there's not going to be a property associated with it. And so you have to now make a new property in the property tree. And so you do that in the 787-8-set.xml file. Now, this is where most switches are going to be. This is where most switches for their properties are going to be initialized. And so if we see here, I named it, so you can name it whatever you want. I named it forward man. So here it is, forward man. Here's the property that I made. And here I have the actual property name that I named it. I named it forward man. The type, so the property type, so it's a Boolean because this toggle switch only has 2 states, 0 or 1. You can have it different states. There's doubles and there's ints as well, strings and floats, stuff like that. And then you have to specify, I believe you have to specify a default value. So this defaults to true, which is a Boolean value of just 1. So 1 true, 0 false. And then we have to close off this code here by just saying, less than / and then the object name. And so you might be asking, okay, how do you know to place it, like where you placed it? Well, I mean, it's kind of up to you to a certain extent. Like, if I'm on the lighting subpanel, I would expect, if I were to make a new property for the lighting subpanel, I'd almost expect that someone to place it in this section, lighting. And so I could have either made a whole new section in this kind of folder called like personalization. Right? I could have done that, but I put it under switches because this is just an example, and this might be kind of confusing at first. So, but you can just ask me later on, and maybe I can give you a live demo, or maybe I can show you a better example. But yeah, if you go to the way this is organized, if you look up here, this says controls. So we can actually navigate to that folder in the property tree. If we hit / and controls, and all these little folders here, fires, MFD, can be seen in this folder. So fires, and then we have like fire 1 here. And so I placed it under switches because I didn't know where else to put it. So controls, under controls, under switches, and here it is right here, forward man equals false currently. You can kind of see that change as well. If we click on it, it changes to true. But yeah, I could have put it under here, under the lighting folder if I wanted to. But I think logically, for now, under switches is fine. Okay, yeah. Moving on. I have 2 values here. 0 and 1, because this toggle switch only has 2 states. If it had 3 states, I'd have to change this to value, because some toggle switches actually do have 3 states, and then 2. And then I'd have to change this from a boolean to a double, and the default value would be 0, right? But yeah, let me change that because we're not going to do that. But I just want to show you real quick how to do that. And so that's that. So that makes the selectable field, and kind of, if you select that selectable field, it changes this property to 0 to 1, or from 1 to 0. Now this animation is actually responsible for the rotation of the object. If you can see here, if you compare the two, instead of saying pick, this says rotate. And so we're rotating, the animation is now a rotation, and we're rotating the object based on this property here. And so based on this property here, we can kind of say, like, okay, if the value of this property is like 1, then rotate this object to an angle of 0. Or if it's a value of 1, rotate it to an angle of 30. So that's what that's saying. I could put this at 60 or whatever, or like 90, but most toggle switches are gonna be like 30 if you look at other toggle switches. Now this axis kind of tells the code it tells the object what to rotate around. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's the location of the actual switch. This is the location of what it's rotating around, which aren't exactly the same. And that distinction is important. Now, to find this kind of location, let's go to Blender. Let's zoom in on this switch here. So we would go to, if you see up here, there's like a little arrow here. You can kind of click it and go to View, and then we want to get our 3D cursor, and then just kind of click on where we want to, rotate this object. We want to rotate it kind of. If you there's like, we want to rotate it like at the kind of bottom of this switch here, right? Instead of like in the middle, we want the bottom. And so that's gonna be, doesn't have to be perfect, because if you get close enough, that'll look close enough, honestly. And that kind of matches what I have in the code here. I have 0.0125 as my x, which is close enough to that, and then I have negative 0.27 as my z. And if you can see here, you might ask, okay, I mean, there's 3 coordinates, but then you have 6. Okay, well, that's confusing. So the way that this rotates, this has to know along what axis it's rotating around. And so it's going to be rotating. If you look at this, you might say, okay, if I look at this axis, you might say, okay, it's rotating around the z-axis, but it's actually rotating around the y-axis, because for rotating this way, that's going to be rotating around the y-axis here, right? And so that y-axis can't have a static value like the x and the z. It has to be from 0 to 1, because it's able to change. So yeah, and then that's it. And then after you do all that, you save it, and then if you make changes, so say if I made a change from 30 to 60, or not 600, 60, I go to save all, and then to see those changes take place, I'm in FlightGear. I'll just go to File, Reset, and FlightGear should show you those changes you've made. Now, I would encourage you, while that's loading, or I would encourage you to kind of mess around with these values and mess around with this code, and then reset FlightGear to see those changes. And I think that would be beneficial to your understanding if you just kind of mess around with this some more on your own time. I think that's about it. If we want to wait for this to open, you can kind of... So yeah, if you see here, that's a 60 angle, and that's 0. We can change the default state back to false here. And I'll show you what happens then. Because when we opened it, it was defaulted to this state. But now it should be defaulted to the open state. And I'll probably show you that and then call it for this video. This is getting to be pretty long, these videos. Okay. Zoom in and then use control mouse. So yeah, as you can see here, it's defaulted to open because I changed this back to false. So yeah, that's it. Thanks for watching.